What's going on, guys? We are taking it back to the classics today, and we are chatting about boxwood. I'm gonna show you guys some different applications, and we're gonna talk about some do's and don'ts of pruning. All right, let's go. There are tons of different kinds of boxwoods out there, but today we are specifically talking about the Japanese boxwood, and that is Buxus microphylla japonica. If you guys are not too familiar with boxwoods, they are a plant that is widely used throughout the US and Europe and pretty much just like everywhere around the world because of their versatility and their ability to be shaped and pruned so neatly. So quickly, I just want to give you some basic characteristics of the Japanese boxwood. It can get up to about 5 feet tall, but it's rarely seen that tall. It's mostly pruned back down to about 12 to 30 inches in height. It can be used in full sun or even part shade. It's also relatively drought tolerant, but does like pretty regular water, especially during the warmer months. Now, the foliage is considered evergreen, but sometimes in winter it'll have that sort of bronzy tone to the foliage, and that's okay. It will definitely pop back to a nice, vibrant green color. And another very important thing to note, this will have a USDA hardiness zone down to about zone 6. How can we use this thing in the landscape? They create just such a wonderful stately look, and stylistically there's a few different ways they can go. You see them very commonly used throughout formal landscapes. A formal landscape is generally going to be cleaner lines, simpler plant palettes with fewer selections that are maintained very cleanly, and they're more often than not paired with architecture that's fitting for that formal style, like colonial style homes, sometimes French or English Tudor, or more traditional kinds of landscapes. That's gonna be your more formal gardens. Now contrast that with informal gardens that don't necessarily have long straight lines, but maybe have more curvilinear pathways with sporadically placed shrubs of different heights and textures. And it just has a little bit more of a organic free flowingness to it. Free flowingness? I don't know if that's a word, but it just sounds right. So you guys get the picture. You know what I'm talking about. Formal versus informal. And if you look back at other historical landscapes, especially Versailles, they have so many of these types of elements that really tightly designate your walking space. And that's done with small hedges, large hedges, and walls and pottery, things that just repeat and create a linear kind of element. Keeps you on that path, keeps your eye moving forward, and just kind of creates a grander entrance. That's part of the design element of formal landscapes. Grand entrances and very delineated walkways. You can also create very intricate patterns with the boxwood, creating really dramatic symmetry. And that symmetry is very characteristic of formal design. It defines a space and let you know you've entered. Now, I also see them used consistently to surround a property and help delineate a specific landscape. For instance, a corner house, let's say, that might be a little bit more exposed to a sidewalk or street. Just by putting a small boxwood hedge around that property helps give it a feeling of coziness and protection, and really just visually and physically delineates that particular property. Now, you could of course do that same thing with a wall or a fence, but who doesn't love green? And it's just a more subtle, nice way to create a feeling of boundary or enclosure without having the expense or building a massive wall. Now, you can also use boxwoods to highlight an entrance. You can create a very distinctive and formal entrance just by the use of these plants in conjunction with other plants. So what do I mean in conjunction with other plants? Well, generally speaking, you'll probably want to keep these boxwoods to about 12 to 24 inches in height. Now, that could be more considered a bordering or a foreground plant, but you can build up those layers and plant behind it to create depth in your landscape. So as a second layer, you can use a taller growing shrub and even use some ornamental trees to help grand up that entryway. So again, you want to use this plant as your border to create depth and multiple layers in the landscape, and that just makes the garden interesting. Now, I also see the Japanese boxwoods being used for topiaries, and that just means you are pruning this plant a specific way to some kind of shape, and they're most often topiaried in either a ball or a cone form or something like that. That's fairly simple. Again, just helps create an interesting element to the more formal landscape. Now, getting back to style for a moment, it doesn't always have to be traditional style landscapes. I also see boxwoods being used heavily in very modern landscapes. And the reason for this is because when boxwoods are trimmed, they have a super clean, linear effect to them, which goes really well with modern architecture. And they would be used pretty much the same way to either line a walkway or highlight a linear element along a wall or something like that. And it just creates that nice clean line that can complement that structure. All right, so how are we gonna prune these things? Well, generally fall is the best time for planting boxwood. However, pruning should be done late winter or after the last frost. You definitely don't wanna be pruning while there's the possibility of a frost coming. Your main pruning wants to be early spring. You wanna start pruning them when they're young so you can train them towards the right shape and direction. So growth that starts happening that looks kind of leggy, off in the wrong direction, you definitely want to prune those back. And if you are doing a cone topiary, it's really important to develop that vertical leader. Now, for more mature boxwoods, it's imperative to keep them thinned out a little bit. So not super dense inside because that will prevent light from getting in. So an occasional thinning out is very, very crucial for longevity of the boxwood. After you're done thinning out the interior, now you can go to the shaping and pruning of the boxwood. And this can generally be done with pruning shears or even mechanical hedge trimmers. If you have a long way to go and you need to save some time, that can do it too. Now, how do you get that super clean, straight line with no waves in it? Well, nice little trick is to use a string. And you can just tie that up with 2 stakes on either end, make the string nice and tight. You could even throw a level on it in the middle or just use a tape measure and make sure it's the same height off your adjacent hardscape surface. And just follow that string right across with your pruning shears and you will get a super clean, level line. All right, guys, that just about does it for the Japanese boxwood. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. You know, I always have fun hanging out and chatting about plants and, you know, I could do this all day. I know I say that every time, but I literally could. And I literally do. If you guys are on YouTube, do that like and subscribe thing. If you have never been to the website, go to budgetplants.com where we've got Japanese boxwood and many, many, many other plants to look at and potentially purchase if you are so inclined. Thank you guys, see you on the next video, and as always, happy planting.